But listen to the warnings from the Surgeon General's office in more recent years. 2021, a warning on youth mental health. In 2023, a warning on social media and youth mental health. Another warning that year on loneliness and social isolation. In 2024, there was a warning from the Surgeon General's office on parents' mental health and well-being. In 2025, it was a warning on alcohol and cancer risk. And now in 2026, a warning on the harms of screen use. In this latest report, Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. indicated that while screen use can have some benefits, the evidence of a range of risks to children's overall mental and physical health is mounting. These negative outcomes are related to harmful use, including use by children with vulnerable medical conditions, along with the ubiquity of devices and features deliberately built into many tech platforms to promote engagement. A positive-sounding word that for far too many young people is a path to addiction-like behavior. Keep in mind, this is not a mere advisory coming from the Surgeon General's office, but it's a warning. But coupled with this is also a toolkit on how to protect children and adolescents. We're going to be discussing this today, and we invite you to join us today as we welcome back Bonnie Gasper. She is chairman of the Child Protection League. They educate the public and expose issues that harm children in our schools and in our culture. Bonnie, so good to have you back with us.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. It's so good to be back. Thank you for the invitation.
So, Bonnie, there's a noticeable uptick on the warnings coming out from the Surgeon General's office, and over the past 5 years, they warning after warning related to mental health issues, both of youth and adults. And I saw the Washington Stand reported just last week that nearly 4 in 10 California fifth graders express a need for mental health care. They report on the therapeutic drift that is taking place, and also report that loneliness has become particularly acute in this past decade. What is going on?
You know, that I so appreciate that you gave that history for the last 5 years of the Surgeon General warnings, because that is pointing to exactly the work that our organization is planning to focus on for the remainder of this year is the mental health crisis in our schools. Because part of that, what they're doing is they're driving all these mental health counselors to be coming into your school and doing these contracts with third parties, and what does that involve, and what kind of, counseling are they providing, and what's the ideology that they follow, right? So it is so interesting that all of these things are kind of building to this crescendo, but they're all linked to this growing use of children, especially children and young adults, on devices, the social isolation of being on social media, and not being out in the real world and living a real life, as the Surgeon General report says. Go out and live a real life, right?
Right.
Solutions. But I had mentioned to you earlier, when we first talked about this having this conversation, it brought to mind a book that I had read a long time ago. This book was published back in 1985, which is so interesting, but it was written by but Neil Postman, and it's called Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business. And I came across just the most profound quote when he described why he wrote this book in 1985. So if I could just take a few minutes to read it, I think this will really encapsulate, and it really captures just what we're talking about today.
Sure.
So this is what he said. He says, "We were keeping our eye on 1984, meaning he was referencing George Orwell's book, 1984. He said, when the year came and the prophecy didn't, thoughtful Americans sang softly in praise of themselves. The roots of liberal democracy had held. Wherever else the terror had happened, we at least had not been visited by Orwellian nightmares. But we had forgotten that alongside Orwell's dark vision, there was another slightly older, slightly less well-known, equally chilling, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Contrary to common belief, even among the educated, Huxley and Orwell did not prophesy the same thing. Orwell warned that we would be overcome by an externally imposed oppression, but in Huxley's vision, no big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. What Orwell feared were those who would ban books. Huxley feared was that there would be no reason to ban a book. for there would be no one who wanted to read one.
Wow.
Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much that we would be reduced to passivity and egoism. Orwell feared that the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. Orwell feared we would become a captive culture. Huxley feared we would become a trivial culture. One reason being that the civil libertarians and rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny fail to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distraction.
Wow.
So in 1984, Orwell said people are controlled by inflicting pain. In Brave New World, they are controlled by inflicting pleasure. So in short, Orwell feared that what we fear will ruin us. Huxley feared that what we desire will ruin us. And so that's why he wrote that book. I mean, honestly, that is just astonishing. He said this 41 years ago at the launch of his book.
And that is really amazing. Yeah.
Well, I think Huxley was correct. We have become a culture that's drowning in a sea of continuously accessible irrelevance. It's distracting, entertaining, and addicting, and children spend most of their waking hours on it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they really do. And sometimes parents have the idea, well, if I start screens early with my child, it'll give them, an advance into this world of technology, that I'm doing them a favor. But just the opposite is true.
It's exactly the opposite. Yeah. So along with I think, I don't know, I can't remember if we talked about this, but one of the things that we've been talking about a lot is something we have called the shallow brain. I think we might have talked about this on your last program. But there is growing data out there just from neuroscientists and, teachers. I mean, the anecdotal references are there as well, but kids' brains are developing differently. The sooner they're on devices, they're not learning properly. Because what's really going on in the brain is that all the language centers are just they're not firing, they're not lighting up. So something is very different about just, scrolling through a screen, looking at a bright light versus having a page of a book, working your way through the words, a much more robust vocabulary, and then you kind of create this filing cabinet in your brain. You've got some tactile senses involved too, with turning a page and touching the book and smelling the pages and all these different kinds of things. I mean, they may seem like they don't really matter, but when they've actually studied children's brains as they're reading, the language centers don't light up when they're just scrolling on the device. And so, therefore, it is changing even how their brains are developing. And the Surgeon General's report even touched on that, that the brains are not, the neural development is changing drastically.
Matter of fact, I'm looking at some of their key research findings in this, and they state, and I'm quoting right from the report on page 13, early exposure to screens carries developmental and cognitive risk. Screen use in early life is linked to poor language outcomes. That's a concern.
Totally a concern. Yeah, that is something we are hearing all the time. Well, if you just look at even the nation's report cards, like the National Educational Progress Report, that's the nation's. I mean, the reading scores and math scores and writing scores have been declining for a long time. I mean, they really started going off the cliff back in 2017. So much so to the point now, I think we are less than even a third of kids are able to read at a proficient level. I mean, these are kind of shocking. It shouldn't be acceptable, right? But this is kind of what we've kind of grown to accept as kind of normal. Like, for instance, as of 2024, it says here that 31% of fourth graders and 30% of eighth graders are proficient in reading. Well, only 39% of fourth graders and 27% of eighth are proficient in math. And for 12th graders, that drops to 22% for math and 35% in reading. So clearly, cognitively, academically, something is seriously wrong with what's going on in our schools. I mean, there's a lot of other things that play into that. Obviously, that's a whole other conversation. But the device learning is really a distraction for students. And, some of the things they touched on, too, in the report was that it just, there's skimming that's going on, and there's multitasking going on, and there's just not these executive functions going on and problem solving. And one of the ways that kids are viewing information these days now is that it's not something to be actually known, just something to be found out. So there's almost like this conscious decision to just not even retain or remember what they're discovering, because they know they can just look it up tomorrow or they can look it up the next day. You know what I mean? So it's a very different way of approaching learning as well. And so we're training ourselves to not even not even really, not even bother to remember what we're reading and what we're learning.
You mentioned, Bonnie, about what's happening and not being able to read at certain grade levels, and how this is carrying over to high school, and the stories are even go beyond that as tragedy is unfolding, just as it relates to college and university life. August 16th, the New York Post just ran a story of a UC Berkeley math professor who said she's got to teach fractions to calculus students because standards have fallen so far. The professor indicated that students are 5 to 8 years behind in mathematics. Rather than calculus, she's having to give lessons on fractions and basic algebra, things that young people used to learn in middle school. And it's not just math, but as you point out, it's also reading. And it was Fortune magazine just reported earlier this summer that Gen Zers are arriving at college unable to even read a sentence. And it's just not an inability for critical thinking skills, but to read itself. And that story indicated also that academics have been, they've been forced now to coddle students who have been deprived of really meaningful learning.
Oh, there's so much going on with that. I mean, just thinking about that, first of all, it's like, first of all, how is it these kids even made it to college, right? I mean, what kind of entrance exam,
right,
or are there entrance exams, right? I mean, I've been reading now that they're actually waiving grades. I think it was a school in Michigan where they decided the whole first semester isn't even going to count towards your degree just because it's just such a life-changing experience for kids to be out on their own, right? Well, all they're doing is masking just, complete and utter failure. That's what's going on with some of these classes, and they're changing them to pass-fail.
Right.
But that was something that I discovered. I had not known about this myself since my kids have been out of high school for quite a while, but there are only six states in the country right now that actually require any kind of an exit exam for high school to obtain a diploma.
Wow.
So in the name of equity, they have decided to eliminate all testing to make sure kids are, progressing, that they have proficiency in these different disciplines. And that is in the name of equity because they just have all been pushing these DEI quotas that everybody's got to graduate at the same percentage. It's got to be equitable. It's got to be this kind of stuff. And so then, like magic, obviously, then all of a sudden they're advertising all these amazing graduation rates. But as you said, these kids are they're leaving. They don't know anything. Right. They don't even know what they don't know.
Right. Friends, you're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Bonnie Gasper is our guest here today on the program. She is the chairman of Child Protection League, and we're discussing today the report that came out earlier this year from the U.S. Surgeon General's office on a warning on the harms of screen use. It's both an advisory and a toolkit how to protect children and adolescents. We'll talk more about the problem, but we'll also get to solutions today. Back a minute on Crosstalk.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, author and seminar speaker with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, where did the idea come from that there were little green men who lived on Mars?
Chris, the idea that there was intelligent life on Mars was given a big boost in the late 19th century when the American astronomer Percival Lowell claimed that he saw linear features on Mars, which he claimed were canals. Later, it became obvious that the Martian atmosphere could not support advanced forms of life, so they've given up the idea. What they haven't given up is the idea that there might be microbes on Mars, single-cell life. This idea is fueling the modern expeditions to Mars to find water. The idea is if they can find water, then maybe there's life. But while water is a necessary condition for life, it's not sufficient. Life is much too complex to have formed haphazardly. It needs a lot more than water. NASA could save a lot of money by going back to Genesis for their starting point.
Thank you, Dr. John. This is Chris O'Brien. Thanks for tuning in.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Friends, everywhere you go, it doesn't matter the age, you're finding screens up and open and scrolling constantly. Families coming together for family time. Everybody's on a different screen. People going out to eat at restaurants. Everybody on a different screen. And from little on all the way on up, we're fixated to the screen. And so many times there are addictive behaviors that come about because of certain rewards one will get or get you to the next level. We'll get into some of that as well. But we're talking today with Bonnie Gasper, chairman of the Child Protection League, and discussing the Surgeon General's warnings on the harms of screen use. And in this report, Bonnie, they had some of their key research findings. They have it on page 13 and 14. Early exposure to screens carries developmental and cognitive risk. Screen use in early life linked to poorer language outcomes. Excessive screen time linked to poor educational and health outcomes in school-age children. In teenagers, there are additional mental health and behavioral concerns, particularly related to social media use. Emerging concerns in adolescents are evolving with long-term impacts that extend beyond childhood. A concern at all stages of life, and particularly important one around children's screen exposure, is its potential to disrupt healthy sleep, and screen time interventions show promise. And we'll get into some of that promise. But it's a pretty dire situation when we think about the impact that this is having. And we talk about the mental health crisis of our time. This is a contributing factor.
It's totally a contributing factor because, again, we have to, so as adults that, we've all, we grew up already with our cognitive problem solving, identity intact, different things like that. And then we started learning how to use technology. So that's a very different situation than when you are a young person who, as Rush Limbaugh used to say, right, whose minds are just full of mush, right? Little young skulls full of mush, but they're, basically they're formative. These are really formative times and formative pathways and just very impressionable and very vulnerable and very susceptible to whatever is impressed upon them. And so, along with the devices, it's not only the content that's coming across these devices, what they're scrolling and looking at. I mean, just this continuous, a lot of it's just drivel and entertainment, or it's body shaming, or it's AI-altered images, or, all things that they're comparing themselves to, or, influencers who seem to have these perfect lives, and they look at their own and they think, wow, my life is terrible.
Yep. Compared
to theirs. And it just contributes to all of the social isolation that they're having, too. I mean, COVID surely was an exclamation point on that, but that wasn't the main culprit because we found, what a disaster that was for kids to be just sitting at home trying to, learn on a screen. But the social isolation has, it's a contributing factor to the fact that young people are not getting married. They're not dating. I heard something so interesting the other day, and I'd never thought about it this way. But one of the things that young men fear now is that because social media is all about creating a kind of a following, right? Some people hope to monetize their presence on it. Mm-hmm. If they go out on a date with somebody and it doesn't work out very well, I guess it's a thing to go out and just make a public spectacle of this individual, of this young man, and just really embarrass and shame them for the clicks. And I thought, oh my gosh, I had never even thought about it from that perspective. That so there's a genuine fear for young guys who are like, you know what, I'm just not even gonna waste my time because I don't know what's gonna happen to me if I go with this person and she does something to destroy my reputation. So there's so many angles on this thing that are just unreal.
Yeah, and on that same manner, we've got those who are developing relationships with artificial intelligence. Relationships with AI and talking to whomever, and having your computer answer you, and people who are really developing relationships with their computer.
They are. I mean, they're seriously developing emotional relationships, and sometimes even adults. I mean, I think we've heard about those stories out of Canada where, some man was having basically an affair with his AI bot on his phone, and I think she eventually convinced him to kill himself. And so, this is a really, I mean, we rational people think this just sounds so crazy. How can someone be sucked into this? But I think what we don't always appreciate is just how isolated some of these people really are, and how lonely they really are. I mean, you spoke to that, and there's so much that has played into that over the years. I mean, one thing that our group has always been working on and always trying to educate the public on is just the infiltration of our schools, how it has become just these how they have become Marxist indoctrination camps. I mean, you just look at our schools, and every single ism you can think of is in there, right? Transgenderism and the oppressionism and racism and all these different things. And so the bottom line is every child's identity has been completely erased. They're not viewed as a unique individual to be, to be encouraged and to be, celebrated for who they exactly are. They're actually placed into a group, and they're either an oppressor or they're a victim. And they take on all the responsibilities for this group identity, and they're therefore no longer an individual. And so many are just completely beaten down also by what's going on in the curriculum. So if you're not, let's say, a neurodivergent individual, or you're not a transgender, or you're not, someone who is struggling with any of those kinds of issues, you're not celebrated. You're actually a boring person. Mm-hmm. And so they don't get the resources and attention that a lot of the other kids do who are on these different tracks where they have been, completely confused. And then, and sadly, the kids that are confused are affirmed in these delusions. So the whole thing is just chaotic. And that also does contribute directly to this mental health crisis that we have in our schools. 100%. Because kids do not know who they are. They've been lied to about their bodies. They've been lied to about, creation, like simple science, right? They've been lied to that what you can see with your own eyes is not real.
Right.
They've been told not to believe what they can see with their own eyes. I mean, that creates so much cognitive dissonance, especially in a young child. I mean, think about a kindergartner who comes into class and they're sitting next to Sam, but then all of a sudden next week Sam is Samantha, and they're not supposed to ask any questions. Yeah. They're supposed to just go along with it.
And when you tie this together then with the SEL, the social emotional learning curricula for the schools, it's a disaster waiting to happen.
It's a disaster. Yeah, it's a disaster that is happening. I wouldn't even say waiting to happen. It is happening because SEL has been now embedded. It's been embedded in every school in America. And it's even in a lot of our private schools, even our parochial schools, because it comes in under different frameworks, different identities or different words. And so they make it sound, some really safe, and it's really not. And so that's another thing that we are really trying to educate people on, because we've been at this for at least 10 years trying to explain to people social emotional learning is way more than just trying to teach, little Johnny to be a kind person, because it's all based on these psychosocial behavior modification procedures and intervention strategies that they have desired outcomes. And it's all modeled after the whole UN. I mean, that's a long conversation, but it's the UN goals for education and embracing sustainability and embracing transgenderism and embracing, capitalism is evil and socialism is good and, all these different things, right? So, but it's all done very subtly. And now with AI, a lot of it is done really privately, so parents they can't even see the book or the curriculum. These kids are just interacting on a device with an AI that is taking their answers and mining the data, and then just reframing the questions to keep kind of coaching and directing them into the right kind of mindset that they want these kids to have.
There's another aspect of this report I'd like to share and have you comment on as well, because parents wonder, well, is my child getting too much screen time, or are they not? But in this report, they say screen use may be harmful when a child loses control over use. Warning signs of such compulsive behavior may be manifest as, and they give several reasons: spending too much time on screens or constantly thinking about them, repeatedly asking to use screens, often while whining, crying, or sulking, using screens to feel better and becoming upset or moody when screen time ends, hiding or lying about their overall screen use, getting defensive when asked about their screen use, trying unsuccessfully to reduce screen use, showing symptoms like emotional withdrawal when screens are not accessible, not fulfilling their responsibilities by prioritizing screen time, not engaging in in-person interactions or activities, and continuing use despite negative consequences. So these are all warning signs that, hey, that my child is being impacted negatively by the screen use.
Right. That is very true. Those are really good, understandable bullet points for parents to think about. I mean, just think about in your own home. When this issue comes up, if it becomes a confrontation over a device or time being used, any of these signs are a red flag. They're a warning flag. And we've been hearing from preschool teachers, and these are even preschool teachers from organizations that are not conservative at all, and they're saying they're having the same problems with the little kids coming in, whether it's preschool or kindergarten. They were trying to use devices as just kind of a reward time for, like, let's do 15 minutes, and then we're going to have a little quiet time. They had, I mean, the kids were melting down after just because 15 minutes wasn't enough.
Right.
Right. So they had to decide themselves. It's like, yeah, we can't even do this. We can't even bring the devices in for that amount of time because it's just creating too many problems. So yeah, again, it's just the device it's because it kind of goes back to what Postman said. I mean, what's happening on these devices? It's just this. It's entertaining, and it's designed to be that way. I don't know if you've been following. Actually, before I'll tie that in now. But have you been following what's happened with the Meta lawsuit? That just dropped today that they settled. 29 states had a lawsuit against them for what was happening to children in terms of screen time and the addiction they were causing on it. They agreed to pay a $16 billion fine to settle those 29 cases. But what Meta was being charged with was literally just creating students that were being addicted to the tech. My. So now I haven't had a chance to read the settlement yet, so I don't know where the money's going. I don't know, what kind of platform safety protocols they are being asked to do. But what I do know is when I was first studying the case, Meta, built their programs and their plans with the number one priority was to increase engagement. They want to keep kids on their devices,
addiction,
Instagram as long as possible.
Addiction by design.
Addiction by design, yes. Yep. They made algorithms and flywheels that would drive content to the child, and if they hit something by accident, well, that's part of what actually started the lawsuit was, kids were clicking on, well, they set up a sting, actually. The New Mexico AG set up a sting, and then they found that Meta had nothing in place to protect children from stumbling into predators and pedophiles and things like that. So that's what really started it. But then it's gotten even deeper, into the whole fact that they've intentionally built the program, with the flywheels and algorithms to keep driving content to the user to keep them on the platform as long as possible.
Yeah. Friends, we are just seconds away from the break. We'll be taking that break here as well, and we'll be talking about what's a parent to do in the screen age. So we trust you'll be listening to this. But, folks, where this is going, we're preparing young people not to think for themselves, not to have critical thinking skills. They cannot think outside the box, whatever is not on their screen. They have to be entertained, and so often it just makes it's like they are neutral. They cannot go forward. And this is even going off into the university campus. I heard a university police officer just in the last couple of weeks talk about how they have these police dogs just to go through the student union and to meet with students before they take exams because of the anxiety students have. And they need this emotional support now from this animal walking through where they can pet this before they take their actual test. Friends, this is what's going on. We're raising people who cannot think and cope in life, and certainly it's very troubling indeed, the Surgeon General's report. But what's a parent to do? Is it all hopeless? Back in a minute here on Crosstalk.
Marilyn Boyer was the author that brought you the 4-book set Profiles of Valor. This August, during our 30th anniversary, the VCY Bookstore and Outreach Center has her new set of 4 books called Profiles of Integrity at 43% off for 7th grade to adult age readers. Each book contains 10 stories of one person during one critical point in history, from the American Revolutionary War through World War II. Exciting stories that reveal biblical principles and teach history, too. The 4-book set by Marilyn Boyer, Profiles of Integrity, is 43% off through the end of August, only at the VCY Bookstore and Outreach Center. Call 888-722-4829. We're open Tuesday through Friday, 10 to 6 Central Time, and Saturdays, 10 to 4. That number again is 888-722-4829, or visit vcy.com today.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Today, our topic, the Surgeon General's warning on the harms of screen use. Friends, this is not perceived. This is actual. It's really happening, and young people's lives are being impacted by this. So many young people are having to go off to counselors now, and the emotional health is suffering. We see that over and over in stories taking place across this nation. We find that young people are no longer advancing academically like they were in yesteryear, going off, being advanced in grades when they had no business being advanced, and going into college and university life when they're still back in some of the elementary skills that they have never mastered. We're talking about this today with Bonnie Gasper, chairman of the Child Protection League. And Bonnie, another aspect let's bring up before we hit solutions, and that is a shrinking vocabulary that is happening as well.
Right. Yeah, this is another one. As someone who has just always loved books and loved reading, and my kids were voracious readers, and I have just a house full of books, and I was teased quite a bit for having all these hardcover books and you can just get them online. Well, one thing that is happening right now, teachers are reporting that kids are unable to use what they call Tier 2 words, and these are just words that are not necessarily used in a daily conversation. Sometimes they might have a multiple, different meaning, but they give students a much more sophisticated way to describe, ideas they already understand. And so they're talking about words like, analyze, evaluate, predict, gather, complex, significant, stuff like that. These are words that kids they're not able to use them properly within the right context or even know what they mean. And so their vocabulary is just becoming just really limited and abrupt. And this kind of couples with something that's it's a little bit unrelated and off topic, but AI, the big AI language models, you've probably heard that they are now shipping a lot of rare books and books that are, no longer in print, and they're feeding them through these AI readers. They're scanning them, but then they're throwing the books away. They're tearing the spines off and throwing the books away. So we're getting to a point where we won't even have the written record, actually, of a lot of these books. It's going to be just what's on the machine, which can be changed, as we know, and edited any way that they want.
And
so it's really critical that kids know how to read and communicate and write effectively.
And we were just talking about that aspect yesterday, because we're talking about the whole matter of biblical illiteracy today, and the importance of having a printed Word of God before you, and rather than just scrolling and seeing it, though, sometimes technology assists us in finding something, but to have the printed Word, it's not altered or changed in that regard. So that's right. Very important. And again, friends, the shrinking vocabulary, the spelling that is just atrocious that is going on today. But let me ask you this, Bonnie. We don't want this to be all doom and gloom. We want to give parents hope. And how do we change this tide? What's a parent to do in this electronic screen age?
Like we've been telling everybody, like I've been telling people, the solution is actually pretty simple. It's just the implementation that's going to be really challenging for people, right? Because all of us, we all have our phones, we all have our laptops. We have to model what we're preaching, what we want our kids to do. But I really love what the Surgeon General report started with on page 21. Their big headline was Live Real Life. And then they called it 5 Ds. First, discuss with everybody in your house. Discuss your expectations for the healthy screen use. Discuss with them what they're looking at, who they're interacting with, and how it makes them feel. And use any parental controls that you have at your fingertips, and then just set up house rules that align with your goals. These are things that parents can do right now. And then for doing, the second one was do, so then model the same kind of behaviors for yourself. Give your kids your full attention when you're having a conversation. Don't have phones at the table. Don't have them out to eat. Don't have the phone laying ready to be picked up the minute it beeps or buzzes. Just give everybody in your family uninterrupted, full attention. And then they say delay. So delay the screen time from the earliest age as long as you possibly can, so that children can establish and normalize age-appropriate limits on the time and content, access, all of that kind of stuff. But also just the kids got to be out playing. They got to be developing their gross motor skills. They should be doing things with their hands and their feet and running and jumping and playing and riding bike. This plays into a conversation I had with a founder of a classical Christian school about 11 years ago. She said the difference between students from then to now, she goes, are stark. She said kids are showing up in school now without even understanding what a lived experience like baiting a hook is, or fishing
Yeah.
or playing baseball. They've never had the tactile experience of doing those things.
Yeah.
They may have seen it on screen, but they've never actually done it. That really changes your understanding of anything like that, right? So then also the Surgeon General report says divert. So give alternatives to screen use. Just find the healthy activities, like we were saying, get outside, do things, homework, music, pick up a hobby, do some things together, and then disconnect from it. And this, I think, is a really key piece. Just make some really firm commitments to scheduled screen-free times for your family, especially again at mealtime, especially at bedtime. Read a real book at bed. Do things like that. Detox from these devices. And then there's a couple of apps. Now, the report didn't list these, but I found these as some really helpful apps for parents who are actually what they do is they are designed to lock you out of all social media for a set amount of time. So you can set the boundaries on it. So one is called Freedom, and that would block websites and apps across all devices all at the same time. Another one is called App Block, which lets you block distracting apps for specific times of the day and has a strict mode, so you can't easily turn off the lock. Then there's one called Opal. This one's also highly rated and lets you set up custom schedules to block apps while you work or sleep. And then one is called 1 Sec. It forces you to take a deep breath before opening a distracting app, helping to break these mindless scrolling habits. But for littles, I would say for a family, the first three would be the ones that I would employ. And just make that, across all your Wi-Fi settings in your entire house. And then they wouldn't be able to access these things.
Wow. So you mentioned Freedom, App Block, Opal, and what was the fourth one?
The fourth one was 1 Sec, just like spelled out like one. O-N-E Sec. Yep.
S-E-C.
Yep, S-E-C.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, friends, lots of helpful information here. In a moment, I will be providing you the website for our guest today, but I'd like to open our phone lines as well to take your questions or brief comments on this issue today. Our number, if you have a comment, we want to keep it at a minute or less so that we can accommodate others. Our number, 1-800-733-9829. 1-800-733-9829. Friends, if you don't recognize this as a problem, you need to open your eyes and get it off the screen and see what's happening in our world. And I mean, it's risen to the point where the U.S. Surgeon General has issued a warning on the harms of screen use, and has actually, and you can even do a search on this advisory and toolkit, how to protect children and adolescents. Our number to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. Bonnie, you cover issues like this and so many other matters. Give us your websites and how people can stay plugged in with you as well.
Sure. Our main website is cplaction.com. cplaction.com, and then our email alerts, we put out a couple of them. We usually put out about 2 a week, but just to keep parents up to date on what we're working on as well as what's going on in the culture, and that's a really great resource. And that one is Child Protection League, all spelled out, .substack.com. And we encourage your listeners to sign up and subscribe because it's really good information. It's just a wealth of information on those. And I think that's how we got connected the first time. You saw one of our Substacks.
I did.
I was
You're right.
grateful for that.
Right, and led us to our interview and now the subsequent interview. Right. Again, friends, at cplaction.com. CPL, it stands for Child Protection League. cplaction.com and childprotectionleague.substack.com. Taking your calls here today on Crosstalk, the number 800-733-9829. Susan calling from Arizona, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi. I just had to jump in here. These phones, I just can't stand them. I like that they're fun to look at and all that, but I have to tell you, I don't know if you mentioned this, but the radiation from the phone, it wrecks up your nervous system. Absolutely. And that's your connection with the spirit. You have to have a good nervous system. Hello? You have to have a...
Yep.
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Susan. I guess some confusion there, but yes, she's talking about just the radiation from the phones, and there's all different kinds of screens that are out there, but even on that health side of things, it can desensitize us toward other things.
For sure. Yep, for sure. And there is a growing field of evidence about the EMF, right? So just the Wi-Fi that's being used to, connect your phone to the internet. I mean, I do know people personally who have severe sensitivities to the EMF. So these 5G towers that are going in are really affecting their health.
Yeah.
I mean, it's painful, and it's neurologically impacting them as well. But one thing, she made me think about something else in this report. They also addressed the fact they were predicting by, I think it was 2050, that 40% of kids would be nearsighted. Did you catch that in the report when you were scanning through it? From just looking at their phones and looking at this tiny little screen and this glowing, it's light that's emanating from the screen as well. So they aren't properly even protecting their eyes with blue light lenses, which most kids are not.
Right, right.
They're expecting there's going to be vision impact. I mean, a lot of damage to their eyes. Not only that, but just physically. I mean, just the overeating and higher caloric intake, and teachers are reporting that kids only have the core strength to sit up at their desk because they're just hunched over on a phone.
Shelley is calling from Duluth, Minnesota. Shelley, you're on the air.
I guess I just wanted to ask the guest if she had any comments on, senior citizens, but when we're talking about children, grandparents who are modeling this constant screen use, and how for parents to handle that.
That's a good. Okay, so there's two ways. There's two sides of this. I know because families are so. They're not living in the same state anymore, much the same household or town. So sometimes FaceTiming is the only way for people to connect with each other. I see that as a very healthy way of using your phone and using your devices to stay connected to people that you can't normally see on a on a daily basis, where you don't have that. Because I think seeing the face, all of that is just really, really important. And seeing the child, they can show you their work and whatever it is. But you're right. I do see. I think a lot of times, I mean, I guess I don't want to speak for every grandparent, but I think sometimes because the littles are so much more physically busy and active, I do see a lot of times they resort to a phone just for a little bit of peace of mind, or they just can't keep up with the activities. So I think it's just something really critical. Find activities that you can really do together, things that you can match, at the stamina with, or the child can just, match with you, but really try to avoid modeling that, because I think, if we're going to be talking about this, we have to walk our talk too.
Right. Great. Thank you, Shelley. Okay, we're just less than half a minute to our next break, so I think we'll wait to pick up our next call to right after the break. Our number to Crosstalk is 800-733-9829. But again, a very quick comment here. We know also that brain development does not happen till later in life. Even as one enters their early 20s, Bonnie, that brain is still under development. Yeah, and that's a very critical issue to keep in mind as well. And that's, again, another topic, but this is why even the increased use of marijuana today amongst those who are late teens, early 20s, a devastating impact upon their brain because it's not fully developed even at that point, the part that's involved in decision-making processes. So another issue, another day. Just wanted to put that in here as well. Well, we'll get more of your phone calls after the break. This is Crosstalk on VCY America.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewtube.com. Congress recently declared that pastors and churches can speak about political candidates and political issues. This is interesting. Congress is trying to, help define what are the purposes and functions of churches. But they need to go further because they've left it up to the courts largely and to the IRS. And the IRS has about a 14-point criteria to determine whether a church is a church. In America, with the legitimate separation of church and state, the government is to stay off the back of the church. Why do we have courts trying to decide what God's already spoken to? We have a woman sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court that, when asked what is a woman, couldn't define what is a woman. And yet we're going to leave it up to the courts and judges to define what is a biblical New Testament church? Be aware, my friends, when the government comes knocking. I'm Brandon House.
Bonnie Gasper is our guest here today on Crosstalk. Check out the website cplaction.com and childprotectionleague.substack.com. Let's get right back to the phone lines. We have Bonnie holding the longest from Brookings, South Dakota. Bonnie, you're on the air.
Yes, hello. I was just calling to share something that I heard a young man share on a different talking show about this subject, and he said that when he's 25 years old and he's newly married and his wife is pregnant, and when they found out she was pregnant, they got rid of all their screens, and they bought flip phones.
Okay.
And I was just thinking, that takes a lot of guts, and that's one way to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Well, first of all, Bonnie, I love your name, so thank you. There's not many of us, so I appreciate that. But second of all, I have been hearing the same. It's really kind of, yes, it takes guts, and I really applaud young people who are doing that. But I am meeting more and more people, and it seems to be more of the, I don't know if it's the Gen Zs or the millennials, but they're kind of in that late 20, early 30 age. And because they are starting to see the impact, or they're starting to realize how much damage these phones caused for them, and the social anxiety that they experience, and the very awkward people, they're really being very intentional about cutting devices out of their lives with their own children. So that's a very exciting turn, but it's just not enough of them, right?
Thank you, Bonnie, for your call from Brookings, South Dakota. And relationships, how to talk with one another, how to express, communication back and forth is something that has been challenged through screen time as well. Rod is calling from Wisconsin Rapids. Rod, you're on the air.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you, Bonnie, for bringing up this subject and working on that. One thing that I've noticed is how the public school system has really degenerated into what it is today. Because when I tell people, when I was in kindergarten, we had a grocery store, and we each took turns at the Fisher-Price cash register, and other kids made purchases, and we made change. Yeah. And now it's hard to find an adult that can do that without some kind of computer at the checkout.
Yeah.
And I'll mention this comment, and then I'll let you respond. But when you made the comment on what the solution is to limit screen time, well, that takes authority, and that's something that is very lacking in the young people nowadays. They haven't been taught authority from a little on. So how do you expect them to know what to do when an authority figure tells them what they can do and what they can't do?
Yeah, and certainly thank you for the call, and that really is part of bringing children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. I mean, that is the responsibility of parents from the get-go, and teaching that aspect of authority and obedience is part of raising them up. But some good comments here. Any response here, Bonnie?
Boy, that is such a good comment, because it made me think of something. Well, first of all, as far as the schools, yes, I mean, you have to work. Every parent has to be working with their schools directly, and schools, we're seeing more schools recognizing there's some really serious problems here, so they're trying to implement some, bell-to-bell phone-free times, but that has to really be initiated by the parents. So talking to the school boards, talking to administration, those things have to be done. But his question or his comment brought something up. So the NEA, the National Education Association, just had their national conference again this summer. And one of the isms they have committed to defeating is called adultism.
Yeah. Yep.
That speaks directly to what your caller was talking about. They're trying to teach children that the adults in your life, they don't really know everything. They don't really know what's best for you. They don't really have the wisest counsel. And so they're pitting children against their parents. Yep. And they're pitting us, I mean, it's like, as you said earlier, the authority that we has been invested in us as parents, the God-given authority we have to raise up and train up our children the way that they should go. Even if you're not a believer, you still have parental authority.
Right.
So that's a very serious area that people need to start paying attention to, because this is really ramping up across the board in all of our schools, that adults now are an enemy.
Thank you, Rod, for the call. Let's go to Steve in Tennessee. Steve, you're on the air.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. And for this subject, it's a very important one. And something I'd like to recommend, I don't know if you ever heard the Wise Phone. I've struggled with addiction on technology for a long time, and I had the iPhone, and even though it was locked down, you can still access full internet through apps, and there's just a real danger. Even on flip phones, there's internet on them sometimes. So I did some research, and I found the Wise phone, and it worked. So far, it's working really well for me. It doesn't have internet access. You can find through the same apps, you can go through the channels to find the backdoor access. It'll kick you right out, and it has very limited apps. No social media. I run my own business, so some of the essentials like banks, banking apps, maps, camera are all on it. So you get the essentials without all the other avenues to the addictive, to appeal to the addictive mindset. And I don't know if you ever heard it, but I would recommend it because it's worked really well for me.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Steve. I have not heard about that. So was it Wise, as in WISE? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, Wise phone by Techless. I did some research online looking at different options, and this was one of the best ones I found.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. We're going to squeeze in
Thank you for that.
Devon in Charlotte, North Carolina. Devon, you're on the air.
Wow, thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think there's a bigger connection to capitalism here in America and how the money behind social media really drives people to become very powerful and controlling.
Yeah, and you're going another direction. We're not promoting socialism, Devon. I'm not sure if that's the direction you're going here today, but this is not a matter of capitalism out of control in that regard. Socialism just does not work. We appreciate your connection with us here today. We've run out of time for additional phone calls. Bonnie, final thought you'd like to leave with our listeners?
Well, I appreciate you having me on the program again, Jim. I just appreciate the chance to, keep this issue front and center, and I'm so appreciative of this administration who is actually making this our priority. And so I think we need to be also, as parents, fully engaged with our legislators about, making requests that we have to really get serious about this issue. We can't just talk about it. We have to implement these changes. At the national level or on the state level, but then at your home level, personal level, these are things you can do right now. And we've talked about some really practical things that you can do to salvage your own children to protect their own mental health.
Bonnie Gasper has been our guest today. Bonnie, thank you so much. And folks, the website, cplaction.com, childprotectionleague.substack.com. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.